Okay, hello there. This is David Leakin from the NOD Training Group. Today we are talking about the County Ag Production Survey for 2021 row crops. You might also hear this one called Crop CE, and of course that CE stands for County Estimates. How will the data be used? Well, county yield data resulting from this survey will be used by USDA for various programs, including those administered by USDA's Farm Service Agency, that is the FSA, and the Risk Management Agency, the RMA. For example, when a natural disaster, such as a drought or flooding, has impacted a crop, these data are crucial to the agricultural industry. Project code for this survey is 190, County Estimate Row Crops. Questionnaires go out in two different batches. We have Tier 1 and Tier 2. Tier 1 states mailing October 7th, and Tier 2 states mailing out November 15th. The difference there is that the Tier 1 states generally do their harvest a little earlier in the year, and Tier 2 do it a little bit later, and so we are trying to match up the time of when they get the questionnaire to when they will be closest to being done harvesting. With this survey, we have two different releases. We have state level and county level. State level estimates come out in the January 2022 Crop Production Annual Report. I don't have the date on what the next year will be. I think last year it was January 8th. So sometime around January 8th, 10th maybe of next year, the annual crop production report comes out with this data in it. After that, in mid-February, county level estimates will start. It takes a little bit longer to analyze the data and get everything correct down at the county level before that gets published. Introduction is very similar to most of our other crop surveys. We just want to find out if they're still in business, if they've got ag activity, if any of the contact information needs updating. So kind of those standard things that you should be pretty well used to at this point. If they're out of business, be sure to go through all those screening questions carefully, make sure that they are truly out of business. And if so, collect the new operator's contact information if possible. Again, like most of our crop surveys, we start off wanting to know how many acres they're operating. So that's where we pick up how many they own. We add to that how many they rent from others or use rent free. And we also then subtract how much they rent to others. That gives us with total acres. Be sure that all land is accounted for, not just cropland. So some operators might, the initial number they give you might just include only their cropland. However, we do want to include pasture, woodland, really any land that they own. After picking up the total acres operated, we want to know how much is cropland. So with this, don't forget that hay counts as a crop. Government program land such as CRP still counts. Cropland that's in summer fallow and cropland pasture. All these things need to be counted towards the total cropland on the operation. As I mentioned, this is a county estimate survey, so it makes sense that we are trying to pick up the county. This question asks the county where the largest value of agricultural products were raised or produced. So again, the key thing there, takeaway, is the largest value. If they farm in different counties, the multiple counties, choose the county with the most acres and write notes. If it's about the same value and the acres in different counties, you can say, does the operator live in one of those counties? If so, choose that county and then also write notes about it. If yields are vastly different between the counties they farm in, write notes about that as well. Basically, just you can see the kind of the idea is that we want the largest value. However, if there's any sort of like weird thing going on and they tell you some stuff about having multiple counties and different, all of that kind of thing, put it in a note. RFO stats are really happy to see notes about anything like this to help them make a little bit more sense of the data. The different row crops you might be asking, it does depend on what state you are calling or what state you're interviewing in. So you might be asking about corn, sorghum, soybeans, upland cotton, Pima cotton, peanuts, rice, Sudan and sorghum Sudan crosses. And then there are some additional crops for certain states. Dry edible beans in North Dakota, dry edible peas in Montana, North Dakota, lentils in the same two states, oil sunflowers, North Dakota, flaxseed, North Dakota, canola, Montana, North Dakota, chickpeas in Montana, alfalfa for seed in Montana, and then dry hay is asked, and that is dry hay. That can also be alfalfa, grain, all other small grain hay. That is Illinois, North Dakota, and New Mexico. In most states, the first crop that you'll be asking about is corn. It can be several questions about corn. So they might ask corn for grain, corn for silage, whatever it is. Most states do start off asking corn. We want to ask if acres planted for all purposes. All purposes, that includes grain, seed, but it also silage, but it also includes any that was grazed off or even abandoned. Corn acres harvested for grain and then corn acres harvested for seed are in separate questions. So make sure that, if you read that question right back to the operator and they think that they just answered it, make sure they understand that the first time you asked was about grain and now you're asking about seed. Anytime on these questions, we are asking harvested and to be harvested. So for those operators that haven't yet harvested, we are asking about their, what they think that the amount they still have left to be harvested is going to yield for them. They can either give total production or they can give a yield per acre. As I mentioned, New York and Pennsylvania only. They have additional questions about high moisture shelled corn and ground high moisture ear corn. After asking about the grain, we ask about acres cut for silage. And again, with that, they can also give total production or a yield. And we finish it up with acres for all other purposes. Anytime you have acres in this category or in this question, you need to leave notes about that. Because all other purposes, there's a lot of different options and reasons why it might show up in this. And so the RFO stats are really going to be curious as to why they have acreage in this question. Is it acres that were grazed off? Were they abandoned? Or really any other purpose? Could have been acres that were flooded out. Could have been acres that were ruined by drought, which be especially prominent this year. We'll get into that a little bit later. Whatever it is, be sure to account for all planted acres. So if they say they planted 100 acres of corn, we need to go through these questions and find those 100 acres. So maybe 70 of it was harvested for grain, maybe 20 of it was cut for silage, and then maybe they had another 10 acres that they had to abandon because it was just killed by the drought. And so that would add up to be our 100 acres planted. So that works out. We need to figure out where all those 100 went. And when you have those 10 that I mentioned in that example that were killed by the drought, you would want to put a note explaining that on those acres for all other purposes. A few more notes on the different types of corn or the different usages of corn there. With corn for grain, we're looking for all corn harvested other than seed or silage. End use does not matter. So it doesn't matter if it ends up being used for livestock feed, corn syrup, ethanol, whatever. If it wasn't seed and it wasn't silage and they did harvest it, this is where it should show up. Corn harvested for seed, on the other hand, that corn typically yields much less than regular field corn. Seed companies usually pay the farmers based on an adjusted yield to compensate for this. Be mindful of this, however, because the farmer might try to report his adjusted or payment yield instead of the actual yield. We want the actual yield. So average seed corn yields might be just 50 to 100 bushels an acre, whereas field corn is probably closer to 200 bushels an acre. Corn for silage. So with corn for grain, they're just interested in harvesting the actual grain of the corn. However, silage is made by chopping up the entire stalk, including the ears. They then pack it in a silo or a plastic bag or something, really just pack it in, let it ferment, and then that's where it becomes a popular forage for ruminant animals because it's high in energy and digestibility. Silage is usually reported in tons per acre because, again, you're taking the whole plant, you're taking it with a lot more moisture, so it weighs a lot more, and therefore the average yield are reported in tons. So average yield for corn silage might be 10 to 25 tons per acre, whereas you can see previously seed corn is only 50 to 100 bushels an acre. Corn for grain might be about 200 bushels an acre. But really, the thing that should key you in is that tons per acre. So if you're asking an operator about how much corn for grain that they're going to harvest, and they give you an amount in tons per acre, that's a pretty good indication that they are giving you the wrong item. Moving on from corn, we ask about other row crops, in which case they continue to ask the same basic questions for each crop. We ask acres planted for all purposes, acres harvested and to be harvested. Then they can give us either the total production or the yield per acre, and then again, acres for all other purposes. So not every crop might ask that, but for the ones that do, we need to see the acreage there that was reported if it wasn't harvested. So any of these times we have all other purposes, if it wasn't harvested, it needs to show up in that category. Other things you might need to be aware of as you go through this is that yield for irrigated acres will typically be higher than non-irrigated acres. If the operator cannot give you a combined yield for all his acres, leave a note with the number of acres and the yield of both irrigated and non-irrigated acres of each crop. For non-irrigated crop acres, they may also refer to that as dry land. So if they say something about like dry land corn, that is just them referring to non-irrigated corn. Even more things you might want to know. Extremely low yields. Be sure to verify the harvested acres. These could be situations where they only harvest a few acres to prove yields for insurance purposes. In this situation, you'd have only a few harvested acres, and then the rest would be reported under that acres for all other purposes. And as we mentioned, anytime something shows up in that, you do need to leave notes explaining what's going on there. Some operators might refer to grain sorghum as milo, and then they might refer to forage sorghum as cane. Cane hay is reported in both the sorghum planted section and other hay harvested. If a producer says that they grow beans, do verify that they mean soybeans, or in some cases they might mean dry edible beans. So I think a lot of farmers do refer to soybeans just as beans, but we do have some states asking about dry edible beans as well. So let's make sure we get the right crop there. Here is the current information for some of these crops that we'll be asking about, sort of just the major ones. You can see here, all the way over on the right, we have the 2021 September 1 yield. So this is from our recent crop production report. And then we can see the 2020 final yield. So looks like we are up a little bit there on corn, about the same on soybeans, up a little bit for cotton. We are down a little bit on sorghum. We are just slightly up on rice, and peanuts are up a decent little bit. So hopefully that gives you an idea of kind of some of the major yields that you can kind of expect as you go through some of these. Again, these are averages though, so you might find yourself uh, asking questions to operators and getting some answers that are a little bit above or below. But, being an average, there should be mostly around that. So anytime you have somebody coming in way above or way below these numbers, doesn't hurt to ask if that's, you got the number correct, if there's a reason why it's so high or low, and then put that in a note. A few things you need to watch out for as you go through this survey. It is a fairly simple survey. It's just kind of a basic crop survey, so there's not a whole lot of, definitely nothing tricky. Just watch out for really large acreages. Make sure that you have those numbers correct. Watch out for any type of case where you have a large number of acres that are not for grain or seed. And if so, we just want to know why, because the vast majority of it usually is harvested for grain or maybe seed. But we just want some notes to confirm that it was cut for silage or if it was abandoned. Any really high and low yields, again, we gave you some of the averages back there. Just anytime you have something that's really high or really low, it doesn't hurt to ask if that's kind of normal and maybe a justification as to why. Make sure that operators are including hay into their croplands. Sometimes operators kind of put that in a third category. They sort of think they have crops, pasture, and then hay, but NASS does consider hay a crop, so be sure that is included in cropland. Harvested acres can't be greater than planted acres. That's just kind of a common sense thing there. Might be a case where they got the acres just mixed up between planted and harvested. Whatever it is, just be sure that you don't put in anything that is harvested greater than planted. Here's the progress of the corn crop right now. So as of September 26th, we are at 18% harvested versus the last 5-year average is at 15%. And with soybeans, we are at 16% versus the previous average of 13%. So looks like the crop is a little bit ahead of schedule this year. If somebody asks you why they should report their farm's information, you can let them know that by reporting information about your farm, it allows us to accurately estimate your county's planted, harvested, and production levels, which are then used by a variety of people. For example, the USDA uses it for various programs, including those administered by the FSA and RMA. Local extension agents use it for crop recommendations. Local agribusinesses use it for planning. And then also farmers like yourself can use the data to make marketing and future planting decisions. Sometimes operators try to tell you that they report all this information to the FSA, and while the FSA might pick up their planted acres, we also collect acres about acres harvested, final yields, and other uses. Another thing to be aware of, the western USA right now is facing severe drought conditions across multiple states. You're likely to encounter operations with greatly reduced yields and or damaged crops. In the case of really bad damage from drought, if the crops are abandoned in the field, they still need to be reported as planted. Those unharvested crops should be reported as acres for all other purposes, and then there should be a note explaining that that's what happened to them. Some operators might even report having no crops when in reality they were abandoned, so you can always double check to confirm that they don't have any row crops and that they didn't plant any this year. Here you can see, so really the vast majority of the western US is under a pretty extreme drought, if not exceptional drought conditions at the moment. Hopefully this can get a little better and they can get some rain, but If not, you might be seeing quite a few operations reporting damage or greatly reduced yield or production. In conclusion, write notes and comments anytime you encounter anything odd or unexpected, anytime you run across some really high or low yields, always for acres for all other purposes, because we need to know what that other purpose was. Really, any doubt, just comment it out. That extra information is very important for these county level estimates. As always, contact your supervisor or RFO if you have any questions. Make sure to practice on your iPad as well. And then we do have a little bit of trivia here. So 2021 corn county estimate trivia. Where was the county with the most planted and harvested acres of corn? That was Iroquois County, Illinois, with 317,500 acres planted, with 313,000 harvested. And how about the highest corn yield? It's probably not a state that you would think. That is in Benton County, Washington, 242.1 bushels per acre. County with the most soybean acres was Cass County, North Dakota, 421,000 acres planted, of which 418,500 get harvested. The county with the highest soybean yield was Meade County, Kansas, coming in at 72.3 bushels an acre. And that concludes our presentation for the 2021 row crops, CAPS, county estimates, county ag production survey, whatever you want to call it. Thank you for all the hard work you put on the survey. Make sure you're putting in notes for anything that needs notes and help us get this data accurate down as close as we can to that county level. Thank you very much.